Digging in the Dirt with Dr. David Lipovich.
Welcome to episode 6 of Digging in the Dirt, entitled Village Green. Around 12,500 years ago, the Earth entered the geological epoch in which we live, the post-Ice Age, or Holocene. The early part of the Holocene epoch was marked by a period of global warming, increased precipitation, and the receding of continental glaciers. This resulted in much of the Levant developing into woodland, with large stands of wild grasses, particularly near the foothills of the various mountain chains in the Near East. This led to a general improvement in the sorts and availability of food resources. With the improved food security, populations increased and became more sedentary. The first evidence for villages and permanent architecture, in this case turf houses with stone foundations, appears in the southern Levant in what is today modern Israel and Syria. The new culture is known as the Natufian, named after the Wadi en-Natuf outside of the site of Shukba Cave, where the culture was first identified by Dorothy Garrod. With the increase in resources that came with the beginning of the Holocene, came an increase in population, resulting in an even higher demand for resources that would have driven attempts to find better ways to control food resources. This need would have only increased around 11,500 years ago, when a geologically brief return, so only 1,300 years, of continental glaciation, called the Younger Dryas, occurred, resulting in colder, drier conditions in the Near East. This would have caused periods of drought that may have acted as a catalyst for experimentation by Natufian gatherers with intensified gathering, and early attempts at the tending of wild plants and wild animals that would ultimately lead to their domestication. Settlements occurred in the woodland belt near the coastal Levant, where oak and terebinth dominated. The underbrush of this open woodland was grass, with high frequencies of wild grain, filled with settlements with upwards of 150 people each near major water sources and stands of wild grain. The sites appear to have been used over very long periods of time, sometimes upwards of 1,000 years. In addition, sites are found in the Negev and Sinai steppe, the Lebanon and Anti-Lebanon mountains, and the Syro-Arabian desert. In Egypt and Sudan, the contemporary Sibyllian and Kadan cultures existed along the banks of the Nile from northern Sudan at places such as Wadi Halfa to Kenna in Upper Egypt. About 20 archaeological sites along the Nile Valley in Upper Nubia give evidence for the existence of a wild grain harvesting, hunting, and fishing culture. They appear to have moved into the region when desiccation in what is today the Sahara Desert caused residents of the Libyan oases to retreat into the Nile Valley. The Kadan peoples developed sickles and grinding stones to aid in the collecting and processing of these plant foods prior to consumption. However, there are no indications of the use of these tools after around 10,000 BCE, when hunter-gatherers replaced them. A key site for understanding the Nile Valley Epipaleolithic period, El Kab, later the site of the pharaonic city of Negev, dated to about 9,000 years ago. Some important Natufian sites include El Wad Cave, Shukba Cave, Kibara Cave, Hayonim Terrace, which is the terrace outside of Hayonim Cave, Rakefet, Hatula, Nachal Oren, the very famous Ein Malacha or Einan, and Nachal Secher in Israel, Jelat and Veda in Jordan, Murebet and Tel Abu Horera in Syria, and Jebel Es-Saideh, Jeta, and Burj el-Burajneh in Lebanon. In the Sinai Desert and the southern Negev Desert, a local derivation of the late Natufian culture adapted to desert life arose called the Harifian culture. It is characterized by semi-subterranean houses. These are often more elaborate than those found at Natufian sites. For the first time, arrowheads, called Harifian points, are found among the stone toolkit, suggesting a focus on hunting rather than gathering. The Harifian culture has close connections with the late Epipaleolithic cultures of the Fayum and the eastern deserts of Egypt, whose tool assemblages resemble that of the Harifian culture. A semi-sedentary lifestyle was made possible by living from hunting, mostly gazelles, fishing and gathering, primarily wild cereals like wild barley, wild rye, and wild einkorn wheat, as well as wild legumes, almonds, acorns, and pistachios. Tools were developed for making use of these wild cereals, including stone picks for digging, flint-bladed sickles for harvesting the grains, mortars and grinding stones, like you see there in the top left, for preparing grains and acorns, and storage pits to store the surplus collected grains. Microlithic flint arrow and spearheads, not unlike those of the earlier Kabaran peoples, were used for hunting. Bone tools, like the one you see in the bottom right, supplemented the stone toolkit and included points and harpoons for hunting and hooks for fishing. It is during the Natufian that the bone toolkit is the richest we ever see in the Near East. Ground stone tools were used to process wild grains and acorns into flour. The Natufians lived in small, round, semi-subterranean houses, 3 to 6 meters in diameter, with a total sort of area of about anywhere between 8 and 25 square meters, that were likely home to small nuclear families. Sometimes houses were found in clusters, upwards of a total of 1,000 square meters of living space, enough to house about 100 people. These probably represent extended family groupings, so clusters of small nuclear families that are related to each other. For the first time, burials are a common find on archaeological sites in the Near East. Many of the remains are those of children under 16 years of age, with a typical mortality of around 30 years, and very few individuals over 50 years of age. They include both primary articulated burials, so laid out for burial soon after death, and disarticulated burials, probably representing the remains of individuals who had died at hunting or fishing camps and whose remains were returned to their home base for burial long after they had died. Burials occur within the settlements, but outside of dwellings. Generally, burials were of individuals in fairly small pits, though some multiple burials occur, and some graves were even lined with stones or plaster. In several cases, individuals were buried alongside their pets. These dog burials, first found at Ain Malacha or Ain Nan and dated to around 12,000 years ago, are the earliest evidence we have for animal domestication of any kind. You can see here this is one of the ones from the site of Ain Nan. You can see this skeleton of this older individual sort of laid out in kind of fetal position, and just at the top here to the sort of left of his head are the remains of his pet dog. Burials often included jewelry made from semi-precious stone, bone, and dentalia shell, a type of shell that was brought all the way from the Red Sea to these sites in the northern part of Israel. In some cases, seen at Hayonim Cave, Nachal Oren, Jericho, and Ain Malacha, the skulls of the individuals were removed to be placed apart from the burial. At El Wad, a skull was found decorated with shells and plaster. It has been suggested that this may represent a form of ancestor worship, which will continue to be seen in the Levant through subsequent cultural periods. There is no evidence among the burials in the form of differential quantities or qualities of burial offerings for any sort of social stratification. So while we can't really call this culture egalitarian, as in everybody was of absolutely equal status, male, female, old, young, we can say that there is no real evidence for people who are sort of haves as opposed to have-nots, or people who have some sort of hereditary status so that they have inherited a position in society, or somebody who has, for some reason, earned a higher status. We seem to have a generally similar level of individual throughout these settlements. The increase in food security was matched by a decrease in the amount of time needed for provisioning and for moving from site to site. And this allowed for more leisure time, which was partially spent in the production of what we would call luxury items, non-practical things, including what we would call art. The Natufians, for instance, decorated the handles of their tools with detailed carvings, made jewelry, and even created figural art. So here you can see an example of a handle to what had been someone's tool that has been carved in the shape of a baby gazelle. I would argue that this is possibly also not just an example of early art for art's sake. This is not something that is necessarily symbolic. It doesn't necessarily serve some higher purpose. It is decorative. It's there because it looks good. But It's also something that suggests that there's a sense for the first time of what we might think of as private property. That this isn't just a tool that belongs to the household or to the community, but that it's a tool that belonged to the artist. And so he felt, or she felt, the need and the ability to invest extra time into decorating it and making it distinctive and unique. As a result, it becomes their tool. What has come to be interpreted as one of the world's first examples of erotic art was supposedly found at a Natufian cave site called Ein Sachri near the Wadi Haritun in the West Bank near Bethlehem. This piece, called the Ein Sachri Lovers, is a complicated piece of art showing a stylized version of a couple in an erotic embrace. Evidence for long-distance trade can be seen in the widespread presence, even deep in the desert, of marine shells from the Red and Mediterranean seas, of fragments of obsidian at Ein Malacha from Anatolian Turkey, and of malachite beads, possibly from the Timna Valley of southern Israel. In our next episode, entitled The New Stone Age, we will see the beginning of a lifestyle based not on hunting and gathering, but on tending to domesticated plants and animals and living in small, permanent villages, a lifestyle that would look familiar today to many modern Middle Easterners.
If you are enjoying Digging in the Dirt and would like to help us continue to produce more episodes, please spread the word about our series and send us a small gratuity to show your support using the following link, tinyurl.com/3rxdkvt4.